with Tracy Lang in conversation with Laurie Frankel for Tracy's upcoming novel, We Are the Brennans, which drops this coming Tuesday. Before I properly introduce our guest this evening and we really get into things, just a couple housekeeping items. This event is brought to you by Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana, and Madison Books in Seattle, Washington. If you're having any technical difficulties, we recommend exiting and re-entering the Zoom presentation. And if that fails, the event is also being live streamed on the Books in Common NW YouTube page, where you'll also be able to find a recording of this event after it concludes and recordings of all of our previous events as well. For audio issues, we recommend plugging in some headphones, as that usually does the trick. A reminder also that this is a shared creative space, and we ask that everyone in attendance be respectful of other attendees. Any offensive behavior or questions will result in being kicked out of the session. We are here first and foremost to support our guests and their books, and the best way to do that is to purchase their titles. Throughout the event, we'll be dropping links into the chat where you can do just that. And there is also a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen where you can submit your own questions and also vote on other questions that you'd most like to hear. And we'll get to as many as time allows at the end of the event. And with all of that out of the way, I'm going to introduce our guests for the evening and then pass things off to them. Laurie Frankel is the New York Times bestselling award-winning author of The Atlas of Love, Goodbye for Now, and the Reese's Book Club pick, This Is How It Always Is, as well as the recently released novel 1, 2, 3. Frankel lives in Seattle with her husband, daughter, and border collie. Born in the Bronx and raised in Manhattan, Tracey Lang comes from a large Irish family with a few secrets of its own. She headed west and graduated from the University of New Mexico before owning and operating a behavioral healthcare company with her husband for 15 years. While writing her debut novel, We Are the Brennans, she completed the Stanford University online novel writing program. Tracy currently lives in Bend, Oregon with her husband, 2 sons, and their German Shepherd. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Tracy and Laurie. Thank you both, and welcome.
Awesome. Thank you,
Thank
Lang.
you.
Awesome. Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Laurie.
Congratulations on your new book, just about out.
Almost, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And it was my pleasure to read. I loved this book. It was just a delight, first page to last, and also a challenge and a button pusher and all of the things. And I think that's exactly what you want from a read. So I'm super glad that we get to do this tonight. And it's such a treat to be able to talk about a book that isn't even out yet, even though I feel a little bit smug because I've read it, but nobody else has read it. Which is always funny. So therefore, since no one else has been able to read this book yet, because it's not been available to them, I wondered if you wanted to just start us off by introducing us a little bit to what the book is about and giving us the pitch for it so that everybody can buy it first thing Tuesday morning. Or in fact, buy it today and receive it first thing Tuesday morning.
Right. Yeah, I'll just give a quick rundown. Basically, the book is about a fairly big Irish Catholic family from New York, big at least by today's standards for children. And the story sort of centers around Sunday Brennan, who is the lone female of the siblings. But they're a pretty tight-knit crew, arguably maybe a little too mixed up in each other's business at times, but they're pretty close. But 5 years ago, Sunday left her family and her fiance at the time and headed west, ostensibly for a job opportunity. And so we kind of flash forward to the beginning of the book, and she is still out there in LA, and she gets into a pretty nasty drunk driving accident. And as a result, she decides it's probably a good idea to go home for a little while to heal and kind of deal with all of this. So basically, she's as excited as she is to see her family and as happy as they are to have her there. Her homecoming sort of kicks up some turmoil for everybody. There's questions and some old resentments about why she left the way she did. It doesn't really help that the fiance she abandoned is her brother's business partner and very much a part of the family. So he's very present when she gets back, even though he's married to someone else now. He's there every day. So that gets kind of tense. And ultimately, I think she realizes that her brothers and her dad are also maybe not doing quite as well as she thought they were. They're all having some struggles. And the clincher is really when she discovers that one of her brothers is in a lot of debt to a pretty bad guy from her past. And in order to help and protect him and really her whole family's financial well-being, she's going to have to kind of confront some things from the past and come clean about some things. But that sort of causes an unraveling of other secrets that have been going on in the Brennan family, in some cases for generations. So so that's kind of the rundown.
Okay, you did a good elevator pitch there. That was
okay,
really good.
good.
Yeah. If I hadn't already read the book, I would definitely want to read the book now.
Okay, good.
I don't know, like just from everything you said, is so interesting. One of the things that struck me right away about this book, because it opens in LA, is that like most American literature moves east to west. But this story moves west to east, and I wondered if you wanted to start off by just talking about homecomings and that the role of like the American journey home in this book, and the place of this novel.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I mean, you're right. So often it's, people head west, or that's the story.
And you did, right? You headed west. I did too.
Yes, I
also
did.
East
That's
to west.
right.
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah. I grew up in New York, and there were great things, but I couldn't wait to kind of branch out and head west. And I've been out west now for a long time. And I guess Sunday headed west for a little bit. But yeah, it was ultimately very much about just coming back home and to family. And that's another, you don't see that as much these days. Families tend to spread out, and maybe you grow up in this town, but you go there and your brother goes there, and your parents may retire somewhere else, and people sort of spread out. So it's a little bit like going back in time, I guess, when she heads back and they're all still kind of there. And there's some great things about it, but there's a lot of dysfunction too, for sure. But yeah, that's a great take on it, that she kind of headed back home east.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it hard to write about a place while you were geographically so distant from it?
Not so much for me. I mean, I did leave there a long time ago, but I grew up there. I had family all over Long Island and some of the other boroughs, and up in Westchester. And so I did feel, I mean, I come from this world, this was definitely this was a novel. It was all fiction, but I do come from that background. So I was fairly comfortable with it. And anytime I had questions, actually, my father was a wonderful resource. He, after coming over from Ireland in his 20s, he lived in New York for over 50 years. And so if I had any sort of, hey, how would you get from point A to point B? Or where was this place in Westchester again? He was such a great resource. And that was a lot of fun to be able to include him that way. So I was pretty comfortable writing about that part of New York, just based on my experience. And then I did have him to lean on too.
Yeah. And it's such a, I mean, in a time when we've been inside and not being able to travel, it's really nice to travel in this other way by reading, but also by remembering, this place that you came up. Definitely. And I can feel that in the book. I can feel that.
That makes sense. It definitely was revisiting a lot where I grew up, where I spent so much time with family and cousins and aunts and uncles, and yeah. So I'm glad that came through.
It did. It absolutely did. And I guess the other thing that struck me right away is that that Irish Catholic identity that's at the center of things here, even as, however, like religion and God don't really come into this book. which is also really interesting. You want to talk a little bit about that Irish Catholic as culture and community, rather than per se as as religion, or even nationality for the most part.
Yeah, you're right. It's interesting. It's definitely an influence in their lives today, but they're not churchgoers. It all it comes from their family roots and that history. And in this particular case, it was their mom that was really more steeped in it. So they grew up that way. And that's something else I felt really comfortable writing about, because that's my own experience. I was raised Catholic, but really reluctantly. I did go to church every week, and I went to see CD classes, and I made some of the sacraments, the Holy Communion and confession, and but it was really kicking and screaming. And my mother would to this day be happy to tell you awful stories about how I nagged her. When can I stop going? I don't want to do this anymore. And so she, at some point said, okay, when you turn 13, it's up to you. And I'm sure the hope was I would buy in maybe, but I was done when I turned 13. And she actually is not a part of the church anymore now, but she was then. And so in any case, I haven't been back and part of that in so long, but I still feel so connected to that culture and that world. And just because that's where my parents grew up, that's where they were from, all their siblings and their parents. And so yeah, but definitely that's my experience as well as the siblings in this book.
Yeah. Oh, let's talk about the siblings in this book. I love books about big families. I have this peeve, though, as a reader, when I can't tell characters apart. And you do a really beautiful job. I never had any question who anyone was. I could follow everyone through this book, which I appreciated so much as a reader. I wonder if, like, how hard it was to give them all, to make them all really stand out from one another, and to make them all sympathetic while also like terrifically flawed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so nice of you to say. That's certainly a concern with so many points of view.
Yeah.
I don't hear it as much anymore, but not that long ago, there was all of this warning about, oh my gosh, avoid multiple or use as few points of view as you can, and you can confuse people. And so it was a little scary to use as many as I did in this book, but and that's, of course, one of the concerns was differentiating, making sure that you knew who you were with. And it really just came down to spending a lot of time with each character and trying to find their personality and their reactions to each other, what they brought out in each other, really. But it was hard, and it did take going back again and again. And I had trusted people that would say, I'm losing track here. You might need to tighten up. This sounds like older brother and it's really younger, so there's a little bit of that. But yeah, it was I just wanted to give them each some kind of little idiosyncratic something that was just theirs that helped us keep track. Yeah. Much like, by the way, I have to say, you did so well in 1, 2, 3. We have triplets, so talk about a potential difficulty of differentiating voice there, but no problem. No problem.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very nice. I mean, in some ways it was easier for me because it's first person. I wrote them in the first person, which is not my inclination, but certainly allows voice to come out. Whereas you had to do this in a close third person all the way through. And that's really, I mean, it was really well done. One of the things that I loved is in the braiding of it is that each end of the chapter kind of kicks off the next chapter, which is a really nice stylistic device to kind of help us see how much these people overlap. I want to call them kids. Like, I feel very protective of them, but they're obviously not kids. They're adults.
Right.
But they overlap in that way that is really, really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I've actually, anyone who has read it has commented on that, and I didn't know if that would, I used that from the beginning, my first draft. And I really didn't know if I'd be able to carry it through, because it does get tough at times trying to pass through time that way. But ultimately it was such a help to me in keeping it as tight as possible with so many characters. And so I went with it, and luckily everybody else liked it too. I did worry if someone at some point would say, I don't know if this is gonna, but yeah, it gave me a structure. It was very helpful to me. Yeah.
Did it make it hard to revise though? Because you pull one thread and the whole thing unravels.
A little bit. There were a couple times where I really had to think about how to transition from one to the next. And honestly, the toughest one was the first chapter, because she's in LA and he's in New York. Luckily, it was the first chapter though. And so I think it worked, but there were definitely moments where it could have been a little dicey, but
yeah, for sure. I mean, that's always the way with those things. You're like, oh, this is going to make my life so much easier, but no, it doesn't. It makes your life more difficult in a few places.
Exactly. Yeah. But it worked enough that I was like, okay, I really want to see if I can do this. So
you did.
I think in the end it helped. Yeah,
you did. You did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
How tough a needle to thread was making these characters all likable, even as they are kind of disasters in a lot of ways?
Well, part of that's just, I've just drawn to those characters and everything I read and write. So I'm sure that's part of it. But I guess to me, it just all came down to intentions, and mostly everyone here is very well intentioned. And they would do anything for each other, even if it's the wrong thing they're doing, and so I just think there's something about that you can't, that's just so compelling. And we've all, everybody's got their strengths and flaws. And so when you just looked at their intentions, they all mean well. They're all making a mess of it at the moment, but who hasn't been in that position, I think, and that's where I think we all can relate in some way to what's going on with these guys.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly what it is. They are really all relatable, and they're all struggling with, like, there were no bad guys in this. Well, I don't want to do spoilers. There are almost no bad guys in this book, and nor really external demons. It's all inner demons that they have to wrestle with, and that makes for a very compelling read. Did you know that going in?
I knew that there would be a large focus on the internal demons. And, I think a lot of that comes from the culture we were talking about earlier, growing up in the Catholic culture. And I know there are people that take so much more from the Catholic religion than I did. I had my experience and everybody's got theirs. But I also know when I meet a new person and you just say a few words and you're like, oh, recovering Catholic, like there's something to that, and so that's where this family's kind of the root of so much of what they're hiding from each other comes from, and so I kind of knew it would probably be very internal, that they're doing it to themselves.
In
a large sense,
right? Yes. Well, but also to each other, which is sort of the rub here. I mean, which was the other thing that I really loved about this book, is that the relationships are very unusual. There were no pat sibling relationships. There was no pat love story either. Like none of that was so that is, I think that often when books with large casts like this, there's like, well, these are the close siblings and these are the siblings who don't get along, or like, this is the solid marriage and this is the marriage that's in trouble. But in fact, everything was a little bit unusual, and I think that was really the strength of it. Was that something that you like that was in the seed of this thing for you?
I think so. I can't say I went in knowing shooting for those exact goals, but I definitely love to just explore the gray.
Yeah.
And there's just so
Right.
much gray, and we're all that way, I think.
Yeah.
And so nobody's 100% good, nobody's 100%, all of that, and it's I think it's easy to understand how these guys get into the messes they're in, and how it happens to all of us.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was probably so much of it, is I just like to really get down and dirty in the gray.
And you did. Were some of them harder to write than others? Some of the characters or some of the relationships, or were some of them more fun to write than others?
Sure. I mean, each of them had their highlight for me. But Jackie was a lot of fun. The younger brother, I would have liked to spend a little more time, but with such a big cast, you could only do so much.
Right.
But he was just kind of fun, and came a little bit easier, I think, just because he had a little bit more of a careless edge to him, or something that was just kind of fun to me. But they each had their highs and lows. I probably writing about the relationship, the mom of the family and her influence on everybody, that was difficult at times, just to and that was not based on anyone in my life, certainly not my mother, but I knew people like her, and so that was sort of difficult to find a balance there, because she could be difficult, and wanting to balance that out and get across the full picture, and with such a big cast, there were times I definitely worried I wasn't able to spend enough time with each of them to make sure the good and the bad and all the gray was coming across. So that part was difficult at times.
Yeah,
If
it's
that makes
interesting
sense.
that it makes perfect sense, and it's very
Okay.
interesting that you say that about the mother, because she's the one we don't hear from, really. She's the one who doesn't quite appear in it live and in person in this
Yeah.
book. So we have her
She
children.
doesn't, but her influence is still so strong.
Yeah.
So I guess that was the way she showed up,
Yeah.
to a large degree.
Yeah, which in many ways is the best. I mean, it makes her this umbrella character, sort of like overarching the whole thing.
Yeah, I would
And that's
agree.
really
Yeah.
remarkable, a remarkable show of strength from someone whose voice we don't even hear.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Big shoes to fill there. Big influence on the
Yeah.
family. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and so then of course she brings us to shame, to this issue of shame, which really, really hangs over everyone. One of the things that struck me about this book is that the fact that they love each other so much, the fact that they're so close, is in fact makes this issue of shame like worse rather than better. Like that you expect, oh, your loving, supportive family will help with your shame, will help mitigate your shame, but in fact, in this case, it is the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the fear. You would think, as close as they are, that they wouldn't hesitate to show each other the worst, or reveal, what they've been through, or what's going on in various situations. But yet, as close as they are, and as much as they would kind of go to the mat for each other, they still feel the need to hide things from each other, and kind of hide mistakes or flaw. It all really does come back to shame, though. And that's where this whole thing started for me, was wanting to look at this loving kind of big family, tons of fun and affection and all great things. And then, but at the same time, there was this flip side where they still felt the need to keep some things secret from each other, and hide those things.
Yeah. Why? Why? Like, why? How do I want to say that? Do you know what I mean? I want. I want to shake them, and I want to say, oh, just open your mouth and have a conversation, particularly
Yes.
since they do run their mouth so much, and which is wonderful, you know. And it's so interesting to watch characters talk around something, and you do such a nice job of doing that. I mean, in many ways, it's the tension in this book. The tension comes from their unwillingness to speak, which is a neat trick to pull off with words.
Yeah, it again goes back to that idea of shame, you know, whereas guilt can be, I think, useful at
Yeah,
times,
yeah,
and you can learn from that, and we can use that it's no fun, but we can use it. Shame really, I think, is just so destructive because it's not about what I did this thing, I feel bad about it, so I'm going to try not to do it in the future, I'm going to learn from it. Shame is more about, you know, I'm a bad person, or I'm a failure, or whatever it might be for that character, that person. um and that kind of just promotes secrecy, you know, not wanting to expose that because you believe that about yourself, you
yeah.
know. And that's what trips up some of the Brennans, is they believe certain things about themselves. You know, then they're shameful and they want to hide it, they don't want to talk about it. Let's just bury this, you know. That's because that's what they've done. But, you know, ultimately they realize that if they're going to kind of save themselves here, they've got to start doing something different.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, right, yeah. Well, and they're a big family. Do you think that that this book was always like that a book about a large family was always also going to be about shame and secrets, that those things are part of what happens when you're in a family of that size?
You know, I don't know that has to do with the family size. For me, this was more about, again, largely the influence of the church, of
Yeah.
where of the Catholic religion, and how it affected this particular family. Um, and I mean, so much of it was based on, I wanted to explore all of that because of my own experience, which, again, none of this is autobiographical. None of the characters or events or situations are based on me or my family, but I did grow up in this and this world. And, you know, my dad was one of 15. He had 7 sisters and 7 brothers. And my mom was one of 4 girls, and they all had multiple children. And so it was just me and my brother. So we were kind of a smaller unit, but we were around this huge, wonderful family all the time. We spent so much time in Ireland and got to know our family there. And then our family in New York, we were really a part of each other's lives. And there was so much fun to that, and feeling like part of this big clan with loads of people that had your back. And um, but there was that Catholic influence. And at some point, you know, along the way, I realized, wow, there's just stuff that we didn't talk about, as
Yeah.
loving and we were, and how much fun and how much time we spent together. What brought it home to me was realizing at a kind of a young age that my mom actually had 3 sisters, but for a long time I didn't realize there was a third one. And the other 2, we were part of each other's daily lives almost, and the cousins, all sleepovers and all of that good stuff. But I kind of became aware at some point that there was another sister, an older sister, that lived out of state and would visit here and there, but we didn't really know her. And so it took years to kind of get the whole story out. But basically, my grandmother, my mom's mom, she came from a family of 9 kids, Irish Catholic, and she got pregnant at a very young age, out of wedlock by a married man. And this was back in, I believe, the early 40s. So you're
Wow.
talking
Yeah.
long time ago. And, you know, again, Catholic religion. And so there was so much shame, I think, attached to that for her. Eventually, he left his wife, they married, and they had more children, and they were together the rest of their lives. But that event was, her family took her to task over that. And there was just a lot of shame attached to the entire entire situation for her, and that certainly affected her for the rest of her life, and it impacted that daughter, that aunt that I didn't really know, and because she had a really hard time, and she left home very young, and so it was just as I grew up, and now we all talk about it very openly, and you know, the impact of it all, but it's just been interesting to see that how it just spread throughout the generations and kind of impacted everybody, and there was just this, you know, things that you don't talk about, and it's almost like, let's not acknowledge it, and it'll go away.
Oh yes.
Yeah, you know, we all know that works.
Yes, it works beautifully. Although it's great because it drives novels, which is a nice thing. Yeah. I mean, you know, I think you really also showed the flip side of that too, which is like secrets and keeping secrets gets a really bad rap, and we think of it as a negative, but in fact, it's really empowering for lots of these characters in this book. Their keeping secrets is really positive and I mean, or in any case, like bespeaks great strength and love.
Mm-hmm.
Was this your
yeah, in some cases there again good intentions behind keeping the secrets, and some of them you still, you know, wonder, should they come out, should they not? I don't, you know, there's a lot of that too. So but it's what was so interesting to me was whether the intention behind keeping the secret is good or bad, there's still this impact that it affects other people, and there's collateral damage often that you don't think about at the time. Which I think that's, you know, there's some of that here, and so I definitely wanted to kind of dive into all of that.
Yeah, well, you did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
I guess I also want to ask about all of the characters. So you've got lots of family, but you've also got like this like non-traditional family. People, I mean, all of these people who are related, but then all of these people who are not related, but who really come to be family anyway. One in particular.
Right.
And, you know, certainly that happens with in-laws and such. But it really struck me how for all of the emphasis there is in the book and in this community on family, there also is, you know, is this willingness and eagerness to consider family people who, you know, aren't.
Yeah, I like that idea. I landed on that pretty early on, just that again, it's such a great facet to this family that they're open like that they want to take other people into the fold, if they fit, I guess, you know. But yeah, they're compassionate, and they're happy to do that. And so that particular character I kind of wanted in there from the get-go. I also just thought he would be a great way to view as someone who's not a Brennan, but as close as you can get.
Right.
You know, that he could have a little step back perspective on all of them. So I thought that would be kind of fun too.
Yeah, well, and he is a great character, and he's at the center. I mean, he, like, in the same way that the mother is, he also is at the center of lots of people's stories in this book, even as he is not in fact a sibling. He is not related. He's just as central as if, you know, as if he were, which is really pretty remarkable. And the again, the kind of the way in which he is their past and the present and future, he kind of moves them through.
Yeah, and you know, interestingly, he's kind of the one character that's not holding on to. He's sort of an innocent bystander to some degree, you know, to everything that's going on. So it just seemed like that would be an interesting perspective to bring into the mix for those reasons.
Yeah,
because he knows these guys in and out. He's a little on the outside of it, just a little. So yeah, it just seemed like a great way to get another view at all that.
Yeah. I mean, and he does. And I mean, again, because nobody has read this book yet, I don't want to talk too much about about the spoilers, but I did think that for a book that's so mired in in lots of terrible stuff for a book that kicks off with a drunk driving accident. It is very heartening. It is very like warm and uplifting. And
Thank
that
you.
too, I think, is a really neat trick.
Well, that's good. That's what I hoped. I know there are a couple decisions characters make along the way that are tough, and I'll be interested to see what people think. Or I still have one friend who's a little upset with me about one decision someone made in the story, and she didn't like it, that kind of thing.
Yes.
So to hear that overall, you kind of take away like an uplifting. That's what I was going for.
Yeah. Well, and gosh, there's entire praise then. Oh, I was so worked up. I was so invested in these characters in the story that I became angry at a decision that, that didn't actually happen. Like, you made the whole thing up. So that's really great. That's really high praise.
I thought so too. I was like, okay, that's good. And we talked about it, So, I have no, I love that. If it prompts some little bit of discussion like that, I think that's great.
Yes.
Because none of it's clean cut, much like life.
Yeah, right. I mean, for real, for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so we don't have tons of time left, and I have learned in a year and a half of Zoom events that people like to hear about your writing process, and how you came to write this novel and publish this novel, and how what your writing days look like, what your revision process looks like. You want to talk about all of that for a little bit?
Sure. Gosh, and I have to say it's fairly fluid, a lot of these processes. I don't know about you, Laurie, but I definitely over time move into different, routines. And but as far as just on a daily basis, normally I kind of kick it off with a few hours of work. I guess I feel like I'm pretty fresh, and it's quiet, and I can kind of have at it for a few hours, and then I have to step away, even if I don't particularly want to. I know that I got to shake all that loose for a little while and get some exercise, or get outside, or do laundry.
Yeah.
whatever I need to do. And then typically I will come back in the afternoon. And it's interesting, some of the problems I'm trying to solve in the morning, whatever I do in the afternoon often will trigger, if I'm working out or out on a walk, sometimes those solutions will come, and then I come back at it in the afternoon. So that's kind of a typical day. I don't know how interesting that is, but as far as this book, it probably took about 2 years, but that included, stepping back at times for a significant portion of time just to get some distance and then come back at it. You might do that too. I know a lot of people do. But I definitely had some help in the sense that I started it right before I did the Stanford program, online novel writing program. And so I chose that program because it was all about, learning more about craft, but pushing through on your novel and keeping at it. And so that was great for me, and particularly helpful because I guess in the beginning I felt, when I realized I had so many voices, I kind of got a little nervous about that. And especially being somewhat new. And so that was just such a great opportunity to continually workshop pieces and ideas and get some feedback there. And then is that of interest, or what? Anything else I should hit on? Like, I don't want to bore people.
No, I mean, I don't think. First of all, I think process is endlessly fascinating,
Okay.
and particularly in this case because it's such an interesting book structurally. Whether you like how much of it you knew going in, and how much it changes, how much is outlined versus how much you find along the way, how much you fix in late stage, revisions and edits and such, versus like, oh no, this just like came out of your brain fully formed.
No, I agree. That's always an interesting question because people do the whole plotting and pantsing so differently.
Yeah.
And I definitely think I'm in the middle somewhere. I don't, including Brennan's, I outline a ton. I didn't know how it was going to end. I might have had some sense. I usually have some idea of some pretty important plot points along the way. And then, but other than that, it's sort of headlights. If you're driving in the dark with headlights, I kind of know what's coming, the next chapter or two, and I'll get those down. And then I do a little planning or outlining, and then I go back. So that's been the process I've been using. And for the most part, that works for me. I guess it's a combination of feeling like it gives me enough structure that I can run with it, and I know where I'm going, but I'm not tied down too much to any outline, because so much for me, so much of the good stuff comes when I'm just sitting there writing it, know. So I'm a kind of a mix of that when it comes to how I approach the whole book. And I try not to focus on like word count, because it might be really low one day, but it took some research and hashing things out and things like that. So, just out of curiosity, real quick, what's your process? Are you a one or the other, or both, or?
Yeah, I write really, really lousy drafts, and I don't outline at all. And if I did, I would be much better off because, I had to cut 200,000 words from my last novel.
Wow.
It was not a linear process.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So the more I could do that, it would be better. I write lousy rough drafts, and then I revise and revise and revise and revise and revise until they get better. And
I definitely revise. I guess there's something in me about efficiency. I've always been that I have a hard time I got to know where I'm going to some degree. Yeah. And then, not all the way, but to some degree. So.
That's really nice. That's really good. It'll be interesting too to see. Well, and in fact, that's my next question is if you're talking yet about what you're working on next. But what I was going to say was it'll be interesting to see how different the process is in the next book and the one after that and the one after that, or like how many of these things are baked into your writer bones, and how many of these things were just true of this novel but won't be true of the next.
Yeah, I'm pretty far into the next one. What I hope to be the next one. Yeah, exactly. Right. And the process was there was so much fumbling around at times with Brennan, just because it was my first. And so I think you would be able to, I think with each one you get a little bit more like, okay, I know going in I got to troubleshoot some things that with Brennan's I didn't know, and so that whole ripple effect, you just kind of learn so much with the first project or two, and then you take that with you into the next one. So it's not terribly different, but it's probably a little bit more efficient, I guess, overall. But there's still going to be revision and for sure. But I'm enjoying it. I'm into it. It's another sort of messy family, but very different dynamics and situation. And but that's, for now, that's definitely my thing.
Yeah. Are you talking about it yet? Do you want to tell us what it's about, or not
no
yet?
I should probably stop there until I go any further. And but
fair enough. Totally.
It'll be in the same vein, I think, to some degree, but yeah.
All right. Well, I can't wait.
Thank you.
I'll sign up for it. I pre-order it right now.
Well, thank you.
Hi, Lane.
Hello. So I'm going to do some audience questions real quick, and also feel free, if you want to go off track or continue a conversation, please do. Don't feel limited by just what I ask, but we do have a question from the audience. Fern says, it sounds like you had another life before you decided to write a book. Was this book percolating for a while, and has writing been something you've always wanted to do?
I've always been drawn to writing, for sure. I've been a voracious reader really my whole life. So I've been drawn to writing, but honestly, when I was younger, I don't know if it was just that I was such a fan of books and writers that it kind of seemed like this thing I could never actually do myself. So even despite some encouragement here and there along the way, I didn't really act on it. And then, of course, life happens and you get married and have kids and work. But when I look back at the various jobs I've had in the business, we had so much of it had to do with writing, not necessarily creative writing, but definitely, and some partly telling people stories too. We had a behavioral healthcare business and worked with all kinds of families with all kinds of struggles. And I did a lot of those assessments. And so anyway, I've been writing in one way or another for a long time, but once we stepped away from that business, I was able to really focus on creative writing and novels. And and the idea, I probably had it going on for 6 months to a year before I really got to sit down and kind of attack it.
Great. And I have a question that really can be for both of you, but I'll start off pointing it at you, Tracy, with this book in particular. And you guys kind of talked about it a little bit, but danced around it also. I'm curious about where the idea for the novel, or where the novel really like started for you in terms of creating this thing in your mind. Was it a particular character? Was it Sunday? Was it the accident? And then you were like, okay, what does this mean? Or, how did that happen?
It was really the situation of someone coming home back into the family fold after several years. And that's where I started. And then of course, I didn't even know at first whether it would be a man or a woman, or I just kind of thought about that. If you've got this family and someone's left for a while and then come back, that could set all kinds of things in motion. And it just started to ask its own questions, like, why did she leave? Why did she come back? What was the effect on everybody? And then I had to think about what drove her away in the first place. And so that's really where it started. Again, was just that idea of family and someone coming back into the fold.
And Laurie, for you, have you found that your stories have started with, a character or an event or just a dynamic that you want to explore?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a really difficult one to answer, because I think trying to go back and say, like, where did this start? I do not know. I think I usually start with a pretty specific question, or like an idea that I'm going to look at pretty closely. I often have things I really want to say. They are often rants I am having. Like while I walk the dog, or I'm taking a shot. Like, if only everybody would listen to me about this thing, then everything would be better. And then I think, oh no, wait, hold on. I'm going to tell the story about that instead. But I think it starts for me with a fairly specific kernel of a point I want to make, and a theme I want to talk about and explore. But almost immediately thereafter, I've got characters. I have to hang it on characters, and they change colossally over the course of the thing. But I feel like it always starts with individual people and their relationships with each other. Like maybe like right immediately after that initial idea. Like so close that it's hard to tell which came first.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Same thing.
And then I'm curious also, both just generally speaking, but also I think this interestingly relates to the idea of homecoming and family, in terms of how the pandemic and the last year and a half, and you could take this any direction you want, whether it has affected your next novel or your edits on this novel, but so many of us, found new meanings for family. Many people did move home or had people move in with them who had previously left. And I'm curious if that, in any explicit ways that you can identify, like bled into your work. Tracy?
Honestly, I think it bled in somewhat. And I guess what really hit home to me was I shared something that I worked on with my agent, and she had some great things to say, but she said, this is awfully bleak. There was just parts of it that and I was like, oh, you think so? And we talked about it, and sure enough, I kind of jumped into it in the middle of when things really started to shut down, and we were like, and plus out here last summer we had the smoke and we couldn't even leave the house, and so I think that came through a little bit there. So I thought that was I thought that was interesting. It was bleak in the sense of the relationships, and she totally had a point. So so yeah, I think it definitely bled in that sense. I can't say it really impacted my story overall though, or my process. I don't think. In fact, writing during all of that in some ways was kind of a great time. I just could check out and live with these characters for a while and try to forget about what else was going on in the world. So,
Laurie?
I feel like the short answer is yes, and the long answer is long. I mean, I was in final edits of the book that came out at the beginning of June, and we made a few changes because like that Blythe reference to an apocalypse was no longer funny, but mostly it's thinking about the next one. I mean, some of it is just practically speaking. My kid never did go back to school, so. In many ways, I was so lucky to be doing work that I could do at home. But in other ways, when middle school is happening in my living room, I was writing in like 15-minute increments for the last year and a half, and I'm very interested in seeing what's going to happen, to everybody's in progress novels. I also think that, I don't know, like I have only the vaguest sense of what I was doing in March of 2017, whereas everyone knows exactly what they were doing in March of 2020. So everybody's novels are going to have to write around that somehow. And I just don't know how that's going to happen, but I'm already very interested to find out. I mean, I too think a lot about all of the people who had to research trips, travel planned to do research for novels. Like, is everyone's novel going to have to take place in Ohio, because we've all been there at some point? I don't know, but I think these are really, really interesting questions for not the novels that are coming out now, but the novels that are coming out a year and 2 years and 3 years from now.
I agree. I'm so curious to see how they'll treat this time.
Yeah.
It has been really interesting to talk to authors and in a lot of our events about this, and to see, just like how everybody has had a different response to the last year and a half, but to see where, some authors are like, oh yeah, everybody's wearing masks in my next novel. And other people are like, oh, like it doesn't interest me to explore that. Or, I went through in terms of what I was reading, where like, if it was a nonfiction book that came out before March of 2020 and didn't have the pandemic, it's just totally irrelevant after a post-pandemic world. And that feeling has like subsided now, but for a while that was really heightened. And it's been so interesting to hear about how everybody's approach to that is different, and whether or not we're all just like don't want to hear.
I know. Are we just gonna skip that year and a half, hopefully?
Which seems like such a weird thing to do, but it may be the most common.
Well, we all went through it, and you can say that about so few experiences.
That's a good point. It is. It is something that we did all go through. So I have one more question before we wrap up, and if anybody wants to drop any questions in the Q&A, now is the time. But my last question is, and another thing that you kind of referenced, but I'm just curious if there were any sort of these like epic family novels that you felt were either tangential or direct influences on your work.
Yeah, such a good question.
For me, when I'm asked that question, I go back to some oldies, but I Know This Much Is True by Wally Lamb. I read that, I guess, probably 20 years ago or near enough now. And it was just blew my mind as far as these complex characters that love each other and are trying to do the right thing. And I was so drawn to that. I've read that like 3 times, which is like 900 pages. But I love that book. I go back to it. And more recently, Donna Tartt. I love The Goldfinch, probably because it's at heart very much about a mother and son, and I have 2 boys. So, but those are a couple of great ones that I don't know, just kind of inspired me along the way. And then there's a great one I loved. I didn't find it till recently, but This Is Where I Leave You by Jonathan Tropper. Another messy, but so fun, laugh out loud in some parts and cry in others. So those are just a few of messy family books that I have absolutely loved.
And Laurie, since you write in the kind of similar vein, if you have any.
Oh gosh. I love Poisonwood Bible for families. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I read this book this summer. I think a lot of people read this book this summer. It's a beautiful novel about families. I Alone at the moment is her second one. Charlotte McConaughey's. Her new book comes out also on Tuesday. Yes, also on Tuesday, is called Once There Were Wolves, is also a really beautiful book about families. This, though, too, it's a little bit less, actually, this is also about families in a different way. And I loved both of these books. Sarah Santilli's new memoir is called Stranger Care. I've been recommending to everyone. Is a heartbreaking, like soul destroying in the best way. It's just a beautiful book about families, and I loved it. You asked me these big questions. Let's look at my bookshelf and all of the wonderful things that are on it. Ruth Ozeki's new novel also is coming out. I don't know if it's the end of September or the beginning of October, which is a companion to this one, which is, in case people have not read A Tale for the Time Being, it's an incredible book, which has couple of very complicated families at the center of it, that I really, really loved. I could do this all night.
Right.
Can I do one more?
Yeah.
This book, Helen Phillips' The Need. Did you all know this book? No. This is just the take on motherhood and family in this book. Little short, teeny little book blew my mind, and is a book that should be read by everyone.
The only other one I wanted to mention real quick was it's a memoir about the Glass Castle.
Oh, sure,
absolutely,
totally.
Yeah, loved it. So just had to add that in there.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
A worthy addition. So I think that brings us to the end of our evening together. The books are 1, 2, 3 by Laurie Frankel and
awesome book
by Tracy Lang, which is not out yet, as we have mentioned, but on Tuesday it will be, and you can pre-order it from your local indie or just come and see us on Tuesday morning, and we will have copies. Thank you both so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a lovely evening, and we're excited to see you all next time.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Laurie.
Yeah, this was a